Calling to order the March 26th Finance and Administration Committee meeting. Good morning, everybody. Is there any public comment on non-agenda matters?
Roll call.
There are none.
Sorry, I asked for a roll call, Terry.
Okay, roll call. Vice Chair Jed Smith
Here.
and Chair Diana Mayer.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're moving on to regular items. Starting with the minutes of the February 26th, 2026 meeting. And
I'm good with them.
yeah, good.
Yep.
Okay.
All set.
And any public comment on the minutes?
There are none.
Okay. And then the minutes will be accepted as submitted.
Thank you.
And welcome, Brett.
Thank you.
Okay. We've got the monthly financial update now.
Sounds good. Let me share my screen and then I'll get started.
Yeah, that one.
There we go. Alrighty. This is the monthly financial update. My name is Brett Uppendahl. I'm the finance director for the district. This is our monthly financial update. We just finished our 8th fiscal month, so that puts us at 2/3 through the year, 8 months out of 12. So we're rounding the corner here, and as we'll talk about here in the next few slides, these are our kind of lower revenue months, and so we're really kind of in a holding pattern as we look at their winter water use and how that impacts our finances. And then, as I think we've mentioned a few times here in the last couple meetings, we are taking this and refining it into, the beginnings of the year-end projection, the beginning of next year's kind of budget discussion, and then certainly the longer-term budget discussion as we'll talk about over the summer. But I'll get to that here in a minute. We don't have a lot of changes to these first two slides other than kind of just continuing to roll along. So water revenue there. Again, I think we've talked about this a few times, but looking pretty good in the sense that we're 67% of the way through the year, 66% of our revenues in. The missing part of that story is the seasonality. So you can see last year we were at 70% of revenue, so it's that 5%ish that we're low for sure. As we'll talk about in kind of the detailed slides, we're actually a little bit closer to 10% behind our water revenue rates, but that's been a trend that's continued here since about October, so it shouldn't be hopefully any new news to the board or the public, but it is a continuing trend in these kind of slower winter months. Capital revenues coming in well. Those are fixed fees, so that's the beauty of our fixed fee schedule there for capital is we're going to get the majority of what we expect there, aside from a couple grants that have timing issues. Expenditures, I think the board and here at staff, we're starting to take a closer look at expenses. So some of the actions that we'll be taking to make sure we're aligning our revenues and expenses won't be reflected yet here as of February, but those will start to take effect as we start to go forward. So personnel services, we're under budget, which is a good thing, and I'll talk about how that impacts our budget in terms of our savings due to vacancies. I also refer to that as salary savings sometimes. Pretty similar to last year. We've been maintaining a pretty similar vacancy rate across the last 2 or 3 years. I do believe the HR department and Vicky will have an update for you on overall staffing levels in coming weeks. We do, generally speaking, have a pretty, standard kind of run rate or attrition rate due to natural turnover, due to kind of the longer recruitment cycles. And so we're right about there. As you can see, 63% this year, 62% last year. We're holding pretty steady there. So it's a pretty reliable number from my perspective in terms of projections going forward. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the actions we're taking to make sure we end on a good footing there and keep our options open as we head into next year. Maintenance operations, wintertime. Again, we're not doing a lot of extra work other than emergency repairs out there in maintenance and operations. So that's kind of chugging along as expected there, 64% as well. We also obviously pump less water and use less chemical treatment over the wintertime. So those numbers don't get pushed very hard until we get into the summer months. And so I'm expecting those to still come in relatively close to where they were last year. I would note just in kind of a, in the weeds discussion there, you'll see we're at 64% of the budget compared to 50% last year. A lot of that is due to our one-time payment with Sonoma earlier this year, where we recognize the entire amount on the spot. So we're just kind of we're ahead, relatively speaking. It's a higher budget as well with that additional Sonoma payment. So to be expected there as well. Financing costs are essentially allocated to be monthly in our financials. We do make our debt service payments twice a year, so in June and in December. But from a financial reporting perspective, we allocate those out. We accrue them on a month by month basis just to smooth them and make them look more normal here as we do our monthly reporting. Similar with capital allocation each month, we kind of tally up all the hours that are used by our staff and engineering and other operating activities, allocate those back out to the capital fund. So it's a regular process. It occurs about once a month, and so that should generally align with the pace of our capital projects. Although there's not a necessarily a one-to-one relationship all the time, but that should end the year in a pretty good range as well. Capital expenses with encumbrances, we've had a lot of good activity from our capital team, really kind of working on getting contracts encumbered here, getting the work ready for the spring and summer. And so those numbers have increased steadily over the last few months. So they're doing a really good job, especially on some of the bigger projects of keeping things moving as we go through the winter months and getting ready for a high-paced summer and spring and fall season for construction and finishing some projects out there. So that is looking good in terms of overall investment back into our system. That's what the capital fund is for reinvesting back in our system. And so we're doing a good job there. Next slide here with a little delay. Here it comes. This is really the slide I spend 90% of my time looking at. And certainly as we do our analysis going forward. Even though we are at a smaller couple months here, I really like seeing that 95% on February. That's something that really starts to, kind of add a little bit of, optimism towards how we'll end the year. I know there's a balance between, water efficiency and water sales. I like it when it's in that closer range. It makes me feel better than being in the 80s there. So 95%, a good month. I mean, I think we can all probably look back into January and February. Again, it's a lower month. You don't expect as much variability. We had a couple wet, weeks early on, but then we had a really dry spell there too. So I think anecdotally and probably in some of our leading indicators, we've already seen that March is going to be a much better month going forward. We're seeing these last couple warm days starting to come through in some of our production data and some of the other data that we're seeing. So we're expecting March to pick up a little bit. You can see that the budget is only a $3.9 million budget, the far left over there for March. So it's not going to be something that moves the numbers in the bottom line, but it'll be a really good indicator for how April and May may be. So I'm looking forward to coming back to the board in April and in May to talk about the March and April numbers, because I think those will really provide a lot of clarity for where we're going forward for next year. I won't spend a lot of time on service charge or capital maintenance fee. Those are fixed fees. And then again, watershed fee, it's tied to water use, but it doesn't have the tiers there. So it's going to be a little more steady over time. And then we're still kind of working through the budget to actuals there to make sure we're kind of aligning our expectations. But overall, if you look at the very bottom line across the slide, and I see it's, you can get a little bit tough to see there to the left, but we're at about 89% expected actuals on water sales. That's that 10%, kind of variable shortfall that we're really taking a hard look at here. We're right on where we expect service charge to be. Watershed fee, again, right around 90%. So it's, tied to the overall use. And then capital maintenance fee, 100%. So predictable, kind of consistent with how we've had the last few months with a little bit of a kind of a ray of optimism there in February for a month-over-month look. Water consumption here as of February. Again, you can see that kind of the run up to, the fiscal year 20 and 21, the drought coming down in 22, kind of that gradual build back that we were, I wouldn't say hoping for, expecting. And that's part of what went into the rate planning cycle. And then we get this little bit of a dip here in fiscal 26. That's the dip we're really kind of taking a big look at in terms of why we're going backwards in terms of overall consumption. But we've talked about that quite a few times. And I don't have any specific data to start talking about the demand functions this month, but we will be talking about that next month and certainly over the summer as we get into kind of future budgeting and future rate setting activities. So this is a point where I want to slow down and talk a little bit to the committee here about our overall budget. So if there's any questions on this slide or the previous slides, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, I kind of wanted to move forward a little bit into forward-looking budget projections, if that's okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious how you are thinking about expense management,
Yep.
capital and otherwise. And I imagine you have a lot of choices. And what's on the list?
Sure. So as I'll talk about in the next two slides, we are definitely thinking about it. It's been a topic at senior management level. We've started to talk to staff about it. It is something we know we have to do in the sense that when we see our revenues coming in, we have to adjust our expenses. There, that is the choice. There's no other way to make revenue. Obviously, we have reserves and we will use them strategically, but that shouldn't be our first option. And so we're looking into how we can adjust our expenses. Obviously, maintain our expense level. So we are starting to take a much closer look at the hiring process. And so the general manager is taking a look at all vacancies, making sure they're, essentially, essential positions. We need to fill them now. And he's taking a look much more closely at those, along with our HR director and our division managers. So instead of just kind of automatic green light on positions, we're just taking that second look and making sure that it's critical for the district at this point. We want to start to kind of create some flexibility there going forward, where if we have to make any strategic moves, we don't want to impact current staff, but we want to make sure that we have our options open going forward. I certainly am happy to have General Manager Hornstein jump in and kind of share his thoughts on that. As I finish my comments here, the other things would be we're starting to work with the engineering team on, maybe which capital projects can start to be either delayed and or kind of have a different kind of run rate, where instead of going full speed over a year or two, may stretch some things out. And so that's kind of always an option for us, is kind of slowing down our capital investment. I know we really don't want to, kind of put the brakes on there, because that is important work. And it's over the long term. We have to maintain that, similar to water efficiency. We have that long term kind of goal there. So we want to make sure we're reinvesting in our infrastructure, but we also just want to make sure that we're doing that at a pace not only that staff can kind of support and handle, but also that the budget can handle. So, we do have a little bit of flexibility in the kind of the short term, and in, how we set up the capital budget over the next 2 years. As I'll show you in a couple of slides here, I don't think we need to necessarily pull the brakes right now. We have so many big projects moving. I think we'll end the year pretty well this year. We're really looking kind of into next year for contingency planning, and then certainly into the next 4-year cycle for what makes sense for the district and what makes sense for the overall rate structure. So that'll be a much bigger conversation. But essentially, and you made the comment, we have a lot of options. I feel like as a utility, as a water in the water industry, we have some options, but we have so many, not fixed costs in the traditional sense of fixed costs, but kind of non-discretionary costs. We have, fixed costs, essentially non-discretionary for, water treatment, for electricity, PG&E, for the water we need to bring in from Sonoma. So some of our big drivers are out of our control necessarily, and we need to do those to keep the things moving. So where we do have flexibility, that's where we're trying to focus our time on, and the strategy of kind of, cash flow over the next, 2 to 3, maybe 4 years, and what projects should take priority. And then I'll just finish this by saying I know we had some discussions on Tuesday at the planning meeting about AMI. AMI is probably one of the options that makes the most sense in terms of, we'll still get what we need out of a longer term kind of install plan. But it may be cash flow cash flow reasons. It may be better to kind of, talk about how we go about installing that, whether it's a shorter window or kind of a more of a medium to long term window. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to General Manager Hornstein if he wants to fill in comments there before I get into the next set of numbers.
I think you responded well to the question, and we do have some additional information that will orient it. But even just a bit more specifically, because it is important, this committee does appreciate what we are doing. As Brett noted, that there's a limited set of levers in terms of vacancies and recruitment. We are looking, and we're proceeding with a number of active recruitments now that are the most critical. We are working to create a pool of open positions until we kind of get through, I'd say maybe the next 6 months, and have the opportunity for the board to appreciate the plans for this fiscal year, next fiscal year, and beginning to think about the rate setting process. I think, particularly with, the direction we presented, as Brett noted, with AMI, it goes actually a pretty long way to addressing that kind of structural deficit in the upcoming 4-year kind of rate setting process, and allows us, to kind of stay on track with the general interest we've heard of. It's an inflationary, but let's not, ask our customers again for, a big lift. So I do think things are looking reasonable, and there's a lot more discussions that we'll be having with the board in the months to come.
Well, I think it would be really good to present the options that you're looking at with a lot of clarity of what capital projects might get pushed off and what are the choices, and potentially looking at reserves. How do we want to think about using them or continuing to add to them? I've done a lot of thinking about the AMI presentation the other day. Were you involved in that in the analytics of that?
Um, yes, and I wasn't a lead in that role, but key members of my staff have been on that effort the entire time, and I've been involved in the high level planning with General Manager Hornstein.
The part that I can't that didn't add up to me is that they presented a $9 million savings, which we don't really get often. It's like, wow, that's great, and then we want to delay it. This is something that we had agreed to fund, and we showed a savings. Why are we delaying it?
Right. I would say we aren't, maybe it's semantics, but as I'm looking at it, we aren't delaying the project. We're kind of modifying the rate of implementation. So I guess it's fair to say that completion date is delayed, but not the start date. And we're
Okay.
developing strategies. The primary issue, and it's not agendized here, so I need to be a bit thoughtful, was to address the issues with our IT staff and the range of critical infrastructure upgrades they're doing, a massive SAP, and that this layered on top in the next few year time period is a very challenging endeavor. And I'm saying challenging, it's not fair. I mean, kind of brutal. And actually, I have questions on our ability to pull it all off,
Mm.
doing all of that work in parallel. So that's really the main driver to be
I think-
thinking. And the financial benefit is somewhat of an ancillary how it would play out.
Mhm.
Sticking on the financial impact, it'd just be good to see true analysis of what we think we're saving with this new extended timeline on completion. And sounds like there'll be a revenue impact. There's an investment impact, but that wasn't really presented. So I'd love to see as much details around that, but also just what are the other options, that we're considering not investing in. I understand our capabilities, and that's not. I'm just looking for the financial review of that. But similar. If I'm just thinking about, everyone has been really clear that AMI saves 5% water use, and that generates 1,250 acre feet of water per year for the district for $30 million. We're talking about investing $200 million in an ARC project that we think will contribute 3,800 acre feet every so often. So I do think we need to think about demand management. We do think we need to think about supply increase. But heck, that sounds like an incredible investment in our water system at a fraction of the cost per acre foot that we're talking about delaying. So, but maybe it's not a big delay. Maybe it's just the 60%
Well,
users and so.
I
But show
do
the
think-
analysis of it
Jed,
and the financial impact, and then we can make the call.
The other kind of piece that we'd like to dive in deeper, and this will be the final that I'll get into this on the AMI, is the strategies to, really work on this 20% of meter, 60% of water, and what's an implementation strategy that where, and then, the opportunities when we, are able to get through SAP, how do we then accelerate? And you'll really be, there's some very exciting, for example, at that point, when we have the IT capacity, if we're doing a pipeline replacement project, we could add on, just have this project install in that whole area meters, and in this project to augment. So I think you'll appreciate some of the thinking and strategies that we're employing consistent with the overall district direction.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, and not to belabor it, but I think, from my perspective, In my division, we have IT, we have customer service, we have the meter operations. All three of those are very much impacted by this. I'm really looking to talk to my team and find out how they think this can be successful. I think there's a lot of options for strategy, as General Manager Hornstein alluded to, as you're talking to as well. I think success is what we want out of this, and I think customer adoption and making sure customers are, using the tools we give them. I know that we have some back office, analytics that would come with AMI, but from what I'm hearing from staff and from our pilot implementation about 10 years ago, the real key here is customer adoption and making sure that when they get their AMI meter, they're using it to its full capacity. I want to make sure we're ready for that we can support them both on the technical side, on the customer portal, also that we have enough staff in place to answer questions. And so, part of this implementation kind of rollout plan, and to be clear, what General Manager Hornstein is saying is that it's a both strategy, it's supply and it's demand management. And we want to be kind of best bang for our buck over the short term. And we really want to make sure we're getting good adoption and kind of, we're providing increased service to our customers, not just, putting them into a place where we're answering, more questions than we can or fielding more questions than we can answer. So that's my goal, but I'm happy to take input from the board and from General Manager Hornstein going forward. So here's the budget overview. This is the beginning slide. I just wanted to orient the committee here and the public to where we're at. I would focus your attention to the capital projects line there, and this is, I think, what you're referring to, Director Smith, in the sense of, we have a significant growth in capital projects from, in the $30 million range, and I would say the year before this was even in the $20 million range. So we've gone from, the mid 20s into the 60s now. So, near, if not full tripling of our budget. There's $67 million worth of capital projects that we should be looking at. It's not just AMI. So I agree with you in that sense, and we will bring those options to you. And there's some large projects there, and that has been really the thrust of the rate increase. We've specifically targeted our capital improvement program. We're trying to reinvest in our system for the bullet points that are sitting there now. As the budget is currently outlined, our capital budget does have water supply, it does have AMI, it does have significant improvements in our deferred maintenance investment levels, as well as some very large projects that are generational and have not been able to be funded, such as Pine Mountain Tunnel in the short term. And then the plans are to continue knocking off some of those larger projects as we go forward, projects that would have essentially taken the entire CIP beforehand. So I think you're well aware of kind of the increased investment level, and that's what we're looking at, because that really is where, what's driving the budget and essentially what's driving the rates. I also want to draw your attention to that final line there, contributions to reserves. And so that was, again, a best practice, something that the board was certainly in support of. There is a breakdown to that $5 million. The $5 million in the current year is 2.5 towards water supply project reserve and 2.5 towards unrestricted reserve balances. I don't have the reserve slides with me here, but I can tell you from my memory that when we brought the reserves to the board, I believe it was October or November, we had largely met our targets in almost all of our reserve categories. And so we're feeling like our reserves are well funded. We're in one of the best financial positions, we've ever been in here as far as the district reserves go. So I think your comment about using strategically using reserves is definitely landing on me. We want to be clear about that. We don't want to reserve fund ourselves forever and kind of fool ourselves into the fact that the reserves will always be there, but they're there for a reason, and certainly to get through times like this, we have a year or two of a potential short-term dip. So I will bring that with more clarity as well as the capital budget in coming months. I draw your attention to the reserve line here because that is essentially what this year in the current fiscal environment, what we'll have to take a look at is, if we're having a shortfall, does it make sense to kind of have a shortfall and then also still, deposit into reserves just to essentially use that at the end of the year again? It's kind of a circular transaction. If we hold money aside to put in reserves, we're in deficit, we got to pull reserves out just to cover the deficit. It's kind of a circular transaction that doesn't need to be there, especially as we have healthy numbers of reserves. So I'll put you to this slide here. So that was just background for where our budget is as adopted by the board. As I look at the current year, how I think we're going to finish this year, and this is, again, 2/3 of the way through, and I'm working with Greg, who's behind me, and some other staff in finance to refine these, and we'll certainly hone these in as we get closer to the end of the year. But, I mentioned about a 10% shortfall in our variable water sales. That it ends up being about a $12.5 million hit. So that's a big number. It's a hard number just to, turn a blind eye to. So 12.5 million is a pretty big hit to what we planned on bringing in revenue. The good news is, and I've said this in bullet points before, where this is kind of adding the dollars to it, is we have a couple other areas of the district where we think we'll have some savings. 4 areas are expenses here, and interest earnings, another revenue source that we didn't necessarily fully budget for this sustained interest rates. So even though we have a $12.5 million shortfall there at the top line, We should get about 1.3 million in additional interest earnings because of sustained high interest rates, and so that will help offset the revenue shortfall. We're expecting about 4 million in vacancy savings. Where we'll take a closer and closer look at that number, but that is a pretty conservative number at this point from my perspective. That's the number that General Manager Hornstein is talking about, one of our major levers. If we want to kind of, increase that for next year, we'll keep our options open. But that is an opportunity
How many
for
open
savings.
positions do we have now?
I believe we have about 22.
Okay.
That's about right. 22 that are not about to be filled. So we have a couple that are, offers are out, but it's about 22 core vacancies right now.
How many do we usually have open at one, like what's our average at any one time?
In terms of out for recruitment or in terms of just pure vacant? Because there's kind of a mix there, and I don't mean to kind of split hairs, but that 20 to 25 is a standard run rate for kind of, not having people hired. And I would say, off the top of my head, I would say we typically have around 10 open for recruitment at any given time as we're kind of going through that process. Recruitments take 2 to 3 months typically for around here, so there's a little bit of a kind of a timing and a lag, but I would say around 25 is kind of the top end, and then around 10 out for recruitment. And again, the HR manager will come and give you more specific details on that in the coming weeks. Water purchase and treatment. So that's a combination of our contracts with Sonoma as well as our kind of associated treatment costs. I put those in the same overall category because they're kind of related to demand. But right now we're looking like we'll end the year pretty close to our minimum with Sonoma. I know we may go a little bit over that, but we have a little bit of additional budget there for kind of ongoing purposes. So we'll have a savings there, provided we don't need to kind of go full bore going into the end of the year for Sonoma water purchases. So I'm projecting about a $2 to $2.5 million savings there in terms of expenditure savings. Paving contracts, as the board and the committee may recall, we had seen a dramatic increase in costs for street repairs and street kind of after we opened the streets. The different cities and jurisdictions around here had different requirements for how much we had to repave and or kind of redo the streets. That was, on a trajectory that was definitely going up and faster than we thought when we set the budget. We're seeing that plateau just a little bit. And so I think there's a combination of factors that have led to that. I don't have all of it in front of me here, but I do know that our staff has worked closely with other jurisdictions and we've got a handle on kind of about how much to expect there. So we're likely going to see a savings there this year as well. Obviously, we don't know what happens in terms of emergency repairs, but I'm guessing between one and 1.5 million there. And then I have a category there for district-wide savings. This is a mix of capital and operating, but we don't always spend all of our budget on our kind of minor equipment repair. We have a couple studies that'll go to next year. Those things tend to add up, and if you don't put that in here, then you're kind of being overly conservative. So we do have 5 different divisions and something around 25 or 30 departments. So I looked at where we ended last year, where we're tracking this year, and I think 1.5 million is a safe number here. I wouldn't expect. I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher, just because we have a lot going on right now, and a lot of these studies are getting a little bit delayed and or will kick to next year. So I need to work with the departments a little closer to refine that number, but I feel like 1.5 is a good guess, or not a guess, a good projection at this point. Adding all that up, that leaves us with a $2.2 million shortfall. So that's a number we can definitely work with. 2.5 million, 2.2 in this case. And I'll go back again, not to kind of dizzy everybody up, but I'll go back again and say our unrestricted reserve there, we plan to contribute 2.5 million towards it this year. If we don't do that, that's essentially this 2.2 shortfall that we have, right? So those almost wash themselves out. We can just say we don't need to add any more to unrestricted reserve. We're in a good place. To the extent that we get more savings, obviously we will add to that, but that's not a hard and fast must, contribute to that reserve. I feel the board's given us direction that we want to kind of hold on to that water supply reserve each year. That should be probably the last thing we cut because we want to build that supply up going forward. That was a kind of a stated mission of the board. And so I'll go back again here. I don't have any plans to kind of reduce that water supply reserve contribution because we want that to build up. But I would make my recommendation now that we don't need to unnecessarily add more to unrestricted if we have this $2.2 million deficit. And so long way of saying I think we'll end the year right about break even. And if anything towards the good a little bit. The problem with this is these kind of categories of savings are not something you can count on every year. A lot of these are one-time. Interest earnings will probably, go down. I would expect them already to go down. They have not gone down yet. Water purchase and treatment and paving, we need to talk about the next budget cycle. What's the right target there? What's the right strategy? We're not trying to create artificial savings, but we do want to make sure we have enough money to, do our job throughout the year. Then district-wide savings, that's something, the discussion between, general manager, myself, and the departments, do we have the right level of kind of budget around for the activities we know we need to do, but it doesn't make sense in terms of cash flow to hold that fund there. So that's all next year budget and kind of long-term budget discussions. And so this is a one-time solution for this year that I feel comfortable with. I will obviously refine my numbers over the next few months, but I feel like, we as management team and as the board can feel good that we'll end in a decent range here this year. So the discussion moves towards extension next year and a long-term process from my perspective, but happy to take more inputs or comments from the board on this. I have one more slide, just the summary slide. Similar as we've been seeing. So, 8% below budget in terms of rate revenues, water consumption about 8% lower than our 10-year average. We're getting a saving that's going to help that. Water rate revenues are offset by expenditure savings and a little bit of interest earnings. And then I'll bring kind of more next year projections to the board in April and in May for more discussion. And we'll do a regular scheduled board meeting as well to talk about this. So with that, I'm finished with my pre-prepared comments and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I don't know if we're allowed to do it. Do you ever do like a prize for people to come up with savings ideas? My last company, we did that, and it was pretty remarkable results. If you maybe top 5 people that come up with top 5 ideas, maybe we can't give them a financial reward. I don't know, can we give them free dinner somewhere? But
Huge bake sale.
I'll bet you'll be able to. I'll bet people have some really good ideas. I would open it up to the whole organization.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think that'll be the discussion as we get into the budget. We need all eyes on this. We need honesty.
Yep.
We need good ideas. We have a lot of smart people here that know their operations better than I do. So I think, incentives or not, I think we have a lot of buy-in for people that want to help the financial situation. Great.
That's all you got, Jed?
Yep.
Okay. I had a question. I've been thinking about this AMI and just wondering, so the common knowledge seems to be that we'll be saving a lot of water with it. And I'm assuming some of that savings is going to be things like figuring out that there are leaks, right? Way before we might have otherwise. But have you done any playing around with numbers in terms of how that might, more savings means less, I'm assuming we're going to have less water demand because of it. So have you also run the numbers at all on how AMI will impact our budget?
So the short answer is no. We haven't incorporated that yet into the long-term plans. I think AMI has still kind of been, on the planning horizon, not necessarily in the implementation phase yet. I would defer to Craig. Craig knows this so well, as you know from Tuesday's discussion. He knows the kind of the results of the pilot program. What I would say from my perspective is there's a couple different things that you have to think about for water savings. Long-term, I think you're correct. There will be a long-term water savings associated with AMI, and that's why we're prioritizing it. I think in terms of our budget impact, so much of what we're talking about getting rid of is these 2-month, maybe 4-month leaks that we end up kind of
Okay.
doing a leak adjustment anyway. So it's kind of, it's a savings that
Okay, that's good.
we're paying for anyway. So it's kind of going in one side and out the other. And so that's what we're trying to eliminate is this, 2-month leaky toilet, 2-month irrigation
Mhm.
hole, 2-month, back room sink or whatever it is. So if we can minimize that, then not only are we having to pay the customers less in a reimbursement, the water is being saved in between, and they're not having to go through the hassle of, filling out paperwork and talking to us. So I think there's benefits all around that. And I think many of those probably offset each other in terms of revenue and impact overall and in terms of staff time to deal with this. I think in addition to that, we'll find, I think they call them apparent leaks or whatever it is, kind of the silent leaks that our staff can kind of hone into on those ones. And then those are money that's just leaking into the ground that nobody gets. And so I think in many ways, our revenue will actually almost be enhanced, or at least our reimbursements will be enhanced. And then the final thing, which is a kind of a difficult message to our customers, I'm not sure how much this has come to your board yet, but when we install new meters, they're actually more accurate, especially at the lower flows.
Mhm.
And so in some senses, we'll actually get a more precise reading. And in some cases, we'll actually get more of the revenue we should have been getting the entire time. That can be a difficult discussion for a customer when they've been used to seeing a certain bill. All of a sudden they get a new meter and it's, a couple CCFs higher. So we'll need to make sure we, communicate that with them and let them expect that. However, in my opinion, I think the trade-offs between more accurate readings, getting rid of all these, essentially wasted reimbursements that we have because of this 2-month lag, and then just not having as much hassle in terms of the back and forth process to reimburse customers. I think that's all net benefit to the bottom line. But the answer is no, I don't have the specific numbers to support that yet. Great. Public comments.
I'm just thinking there's something else I was going to ask. Okay. Are there any public comments?
Yes, there is Eric's iPad or Eric. Let me go ahead and unmute you. And then let me know if you can, or actually, if you could please speak up into it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Yes. So one of the things I keep seeing on the breakdown of the various costs is there's no breakout for recreational use of the watershed. And I sat through the various meetings recently. There's a big push to actually characterize what recreation is on the watershed, and there are a great many dreams for how extensively this can be supported and expanded and so on. And I would like to see a breakout for the actual costs of recreation on the watershed, some sort of, it may not be clear, but at least an estimate, and whether this is being properly accounted for in the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Hey, and I think that's all. So Brett, thank you so much for the update and upcoming meeting.
Our next upcoming meeting is, our next FAC meeting is Thursday, April 23rd at 9:30 a.m.
Thank you.
Great, meeting's adjourned.